All right, hello everybody. I have something that I think will be a little bit fun today. Let's take very old gun rights memes and combine them with current events. Here we go. Back in the day, there was a blogger. I'm not sure if he still is blogging, but he was a prolific blogger at the time who called himself the Law Dog. He was a gun rights blogger, and he had this one post that I believe I'm an old man, so I was actually, I think, around and in the at least reading the gun blogosphere when this post came out. But this post is about gun control, and it's a very valuable metaphor, I think. So I'm just going to go through this, right? And we're going to see what I can do with this after we see it. So here we go. An illustrated guide to gun control. Question: will you continue a reasonable discussion toward an end that might lead somewhere, or is this an exercise in futility? Answer: since what you consider to be reasonable isn't even in the same plane of reality with what I consider reasonable, probably not. Allow me to explain. Let's say I have this cake. It's a very nice cake with gun rights written across the top in lovely floral icing. Along you come and say, give me that cake. I say, no, it's my cake. You say, let's compromise, give me half. I respond by asking what I get out of this compromise, and you reply that I get to keep my half of my cake. Okay, we compromise. Let us call this compromise, this first compromise, the National Firearms Act of 1934. There I am with my half of the cake, and you walk back up a half hour later and say, give me that cake. I say, no, it's my cake. You say, let's compromise. Well, what do I get out of this compromise? Well, I get to keep half of what's left of the cake I already own. So we have your compromise. Let us call this one the Gun Control Act of 1968. And I'm left holding what is now just a quarter of my cake. And I'm sitting in the corner with my quarter piece of cake, and here you come again a half hour later. You want my cake again. This time you take several bites. We'll call this compromise the Clinton executive orders. And I'm left with about a tenth of what has always been my damn cake, and you've got 9/10 of it. Then we compromise with the Lautenberg Act, nibble, nibble, the HUD, Smith & Wesson Agreement, nibble, nibble, the Brady Law, nom, 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 the School Safety and Law Enforcement Improvement Act, sweet tap dancing Frasier my finger, and I'm left holding crumbs of what was once a large and satisfying cake, and you're standing there with most of my cake, making anime eyes at me, and whining about being reasonable and wondering why we won't compromise. Well, I'm done with being reasonable, and I'm done with compromise. Nothing about gun control in this country has ever been reasonable, nor genuine compromise. I want my damn cake back, and I want all of it. Now again, text thanks to the Law Dog, and art by a guy named DK at hsgca.net, and on facebook.com/HASOGCA. So this was a very fun little meme back in the day. But right now, it made me think about something that's happening today. There are plenty of commentators. There's a lot of people that said this, but the two that I have in mind that I actually saw say something like this are Nick Fuentes and Sargon of Akkad, or Carl Benjamin. And what they're saying right now is that we need to give up a little bit more of the free market and accept a little bit more socialism. To which I reply, no, I want my damn cake back. Because the only reasonable answer to someone saying we need to give up on the free market is to say, what free market? Think about all the different things that we have currently that destroy the freedom of the market. Let's be generous, right? We'll say that you might have a state to deal with fraud. You might have a state to deal with, aggression, extortion, theft, etc. You might even have a state to dealing with stuff that is seen as, overwhelmingly bad by an overwhelming majority of the people, right? But, none of this like 51-49 nonsense, right? It's all, I'm gonna allow that because Mises claimed to be for the free market, but he wasn't an anarchist, right? So there's something maybe. Like, let's look at what actually we have strangling the free market, how long it's been there, and let's think about that cake. Well, let's start. How about an income tax? A punishment for working productively, a fee for the privilege of producing. That's not free market. A central bank. Well, it prints new monies to snatch up useful goods to waste on government boondoggles. It disrupts the local supplies of goods. It picks winners and losers in industry. It reduces the value of savings by the lower and middle classes and gives that value to its cronies. the lower and middle classes don't have large non-cash assets, generally speaking. Their emergency fund might be all in cash because it's an emergency fund. It needs to be liquid. That's not free market. How about the licensing of various careers? The state, and not the market, will decide what is the correct form of some service and puts that knowledge behind a paywall and then creates bodies that gatekeep what goes into that knowledge base and maybe even controls prices like the American Medical Association. That's not free market. How about crazy complicated business law? How many ideas have you had where you said, oh man, that's a great idea, I should do something with that. But the difficulty and the dauntingness of dealing with all of the regulatory burden of starting a business and making it so that someone can't sue you until you're homeless is, even if you haven't really done anything wrong, but maybe they misuse something that you sold them, right? They go try to blow dry their hair in the bath or shower. Not only is it hard to start a business, it's hard to maintain a business. There are special taxes and requirements and deadlines. There's food for lawyers and accountants in you starting a business. You're going to have to pay somebody to fill out all these legal forms because they're not, easy for a person to fill out by themselves. Maybe you pay someone, like LegalZoom a few, $100 to do it, but, that's just the tip of the iceberg. How many great ideas have died in the cradle because it was too hard to start a business? That's not free market. How about the sales tax? The sales tax is a protection racket for business, against businesses rather, not for them, right? If, it's a very nice business you have here. If you don't provide me with X percentage of all of your revenue, well, we're going to close your business, and we're going to do it with guns and police and all that good stuff. That's not free market. How about zoning? How many small one-person ideas have not been brought into reality because of the legal difficulties of starting a business from your home, right? A lot of people will just ignore zoning, right? And they'll say, I'll just start the business in my house. Maybe there's some kind of exception in your particular city, who knows? But there are probably a good number of people who said, I'd like to start a music studio, and I have a room in my house that I could soundproof, but, you couldn't actually do that because it's against zoning. That's not free market. How about business regulation? Now, if we look at it from the Misesian perspective, dealing with fraud, dealing with, not providing the goods that have been promised, dealing with, extortion, theft, whatever, you could have a state to do that if you really wanted to. But what is business regulation? It's not actually dealing with fraud. What it is it's laws that are written by big corporations usually that are similar to indulgences for those very big businesses from government. You can, if you're a big business and you are in on these indulgences, well, you can pollute and you can limit the costs of your failures to contain your pollution. Small businesses can't do that. There are also blockades for small businesses that prevent small businesses, or at least make it harder for them to compete with large businesses. You can't start your business for skateboards unless you have a handicapped ramp. Why? How about the capital gains tax? This one's insidious because what it really is you've made the money, you've paid the income tax on it, you've saved it or invested, and you've done so intelligently. And because you've done so intelligently, well, you need to pay some money to the government for them to waste on something else. What the capital gains tax does is it pushes poor and middle class people away from, actually investing some of their savings into, or even deferred consumption, right? Into keeping those as cash balances. Because dealing with your taxes is easier if you don't have to deal with stocks and bonds and Bitcoin, right? But of course, that makes those poor and middle-class people vulnerable to inflation as well. So it's a kind of a damned if you do or damned if you don't situation. That's not free market. How about minimum wage? The government now has to know everyone that you're paying, how much you're paying them per hour, and if you pay them less than a certain amount, they'll come and get you. You have reporting requirements, you have surveillance, and you have a blockade to new employment, that is employment of young people. Employment of people who are moving careers, which prevents people, or at least discourages them from changing careers to something that they might enjoy more, feel more, in tune with. It prevents people from trying new things, and it also prevents people from hiring, people for one-off odd jobs as handymen or something like that. If I'm working on my car, I need someone to push down the brake pedal when I say, that person, I can't pay that guy $7 an hour, but, I might pay him 4, I might pay him 3, to sit in a comfy chair and push a button when I say so. It's not really that hard of work. And, it's not worth it to me to necessarily do that. So you end up with, people that would be employed but aren't because of the minimum wage. Now, here's the one that, of course, people like Sargon and Fuentes are on about is tariffs, right? But tariffs kind of go hand in hand with the minimum wage, right? If you're going to make an iPhone, you need somebody to wipe it with a cloth at the end. And if you're gonna assembly line these things, then there's going to be some very minor bits of labor that you're not going to want the specialist to do. So you're going to want to hire someone to wipe it with a cloth. Well, wiping a piece of plastic with a cloth is probably not worth $7, $10, $15, $20 an hour. So, if someone is offering to do that for $1 an hour, you say, even with shipping, maybe it's worth it. It's also extortionary, right? Pay me $50 or your shipment from so-and-so might not make it to your docking bed, to your dock. There might be reasons to have. There might be utilitarian reasons to justify limited tariffs on a few critical supply chains, maybe, right, for war-making purposes, because we still do live in a world with lots of states that are coercive. But what it does is it turns these tiny, limited things into this massive bundle of sticks that you can't really pick up any one of these sticks without disrupting everything else. Whether you, think, regardless of the extent to which you think that some sort of protectionism might be valid, it's still not free market, and we don't have that today either. How about the value-added tax? Now, this isn't a thing in the U.S., but, yet. But think about it. What it is it's a penalty for making a thing better. Why does the government, this is the wiping the piece of plastic with a cloth, or maybe the cloth has some cleaning solution on it, right? You can sell a dirty iPhone for, $400, but you can sell a clean one for $600. Well, you just added $200 worth of value by wiping it with that cloth. Why does the government get a cut of that? Whether or not you think that it might be justified, it's still not free market. What it does is it promotes service industries and it kills goods production and manufacturing. It is another bonus for rich, credentialed professionals who also happen to be in bed with government most often. And then the final thing that I thought of, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is just kind of what I could think of with a little bit of a brainstorming, is the inheritance tax. And now people will say, well, the inheritance tax, why should someone's son be, able to have this thing and not somebody else? Well, first off, we don't live in a world of, ancient British primogeniture anymore. You can will your stuff to whomever you want. And so what an inheritance tax does today is it actually makes it hard for people to build up long-term or continuous concerns or businesses. What you have to do is you end up having to break up or sell family farms or businesses to large corporations. Those concerns that are broken up or end up being given to those who aren't qualified fail more, which means more waste in the economy. This isn't 16th century England anymore. It's also worth noting that because of property taxes, for instance, which are also not free market, that if you just go to the limit of owning a house, number one, you've generally paid the cost of that house to the government in property taxes over the course of your lifetime, and number two, now you have to sell the house because the government wants a chunk of the house because you can't hand it down to your kids or wife or whatever. Now, these are all things that are not free market and are very much in existence today. So whenever I hear someone like Fuentes or Sargon say, we need to give up on the free market and we just need to do a couple more things, I say, I want my damn cake back. I want the whole damn thing, and you're not going to convince me because because of whatever it is that you're saying that I should accept more authoritarianism in the market and the free market thing is all the free market means is private property and voluntary exchange between adults. That's all it means. There's nothing in there that makes all these problems the problem. Generally speaking, the problem is government meddling in the free markets, and then they call it a free market even though they're regulating it. So So maybe that's not enough. Maybe just me wanting cake isn't enough. But so I've got one more thing here for you. All right. Of the 10 points in the Communist Manifesto, let's look at those and see how well they are along toward completion. This is something people do, but I'm going to go through it just because it's fun. All right. 4 of the 10 points in the Communist Manifesto are mostly or fully complete. Number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Check. Number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. Well, legal tender laws. Check. Number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. And you say, well, wait a minute. There's lots of companies that do communication stuff, but they all go through NSA buildings, and they all use infrastructure and the Federal Electronics Communication, FECC or whatever, FCC, right? And in fact, we just went through a situation where the government was telling these companies to ban this person and ban this person and ban this person, or else you're going to lose some privileges. And, those people were banned. Mostly or fully complete. Absolutely. And number 10, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, etc. The only part of that isn't complete is the combination of education with industrial production, which I don't think anybody is really pushing for these days because they found out that it's much more useful for them to keep the children as children for longer so that they can indoctrinate them more, and then they get more of what they want in the long run by giving up on that in the short run. So 4 of 10 mostly or fully complete. 3 more. They're working on pretty hard and have made progress. Number 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. In the U.S., we have an inheritance tax with a pretty sizable deductible, but not a deductible that will save you if you own a business or even in some areas own a house. In other countries, in other, first world style Western countries, there actually are pushes to abolish all rights of inheritance. So I'd say working on pretty hard. Partial completion. Number 8, equal liability of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Well, what do you call it when you have an entire chunk of industry that is nationalized by the government? How about, what are they called? The air traffic controllers, the TSA, we have all kinds of places where large amounts of government push turn these jobs into a particular thing that people need, whether they want them or not. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the populace over the country. Well, we have factory farming, right? That's pushing out, small family farms. We have laws that are made in big cities that are then applied to the rest of the state. We have that happening in places like New York and stuff like that. There's a lot of that as well. So again, working on pretty hard. We have 2 that are arguable. Number 1, abolition of property and land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Now, they haven't done this yet in a lot of places. But abolition of property and land is the same thing as the existence of a property tax. If your land can be taken away if you don't pay the government a certain amount every year, that is not really a property right in land. That is, you're renting, right? And then application of all rents of land to public purposes? Well, maybe, but if you think about what I said earlier, over the course of your lifetime, you will pay for your house to the government, right? My property taxes for my house are something like 1% of the value per year. So if I were to stay in this house for a sizable chunk of my life, I pay a sizable fraction of the value of the house to the government for nothing, for them to do nothing, because I pay other taxes for them to do things like maintain the roads, run the police, etc., etc., etc. Most of these land rents are sent to public schools, which are public purposes for the indoctrination of children into communism. So, arguable. Number 4, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Well, okay, let's think about this. The U.S. just increased greatly the price to give up your citizenship, right? That is confiscation of property of immigrants. As for rebels, think about things like, what's it called? Where the police, accuse a an object of a crime, and then they just take it. I forget I'm blanking on the name, but you all know what I'm talking about, right? They say, oh, your car may have been used to transport drugs. Therefore, we accuse your car of being used to transport drugs. We confiscate it, and now you have to prove your car's innocence, right? So there's that. So again, arguable. The only point in the 10 points of the Communist Manifesto that isn't actually being generally pushed for is number 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan. Now, some of these are being done in certain places, right? They still have nationalization of various things on the table in, say, Britain. But most people who aren't idiot tankies that are stuck in 1860 with their understanding of economics have understood, number 1, marginal value theory, and number 2, the downfall of central planning. So most government people these days aren't actually aiming for real nationalization or real socialization of industry. They're just doing kind of a Mussolini style, if you don't do what we say, we'll take it from you. So yeah. Of the 10 points of the Communist Manifesto, 4 mostly are fully complete, 3 working on pretty hard, 2 arguable, and 1 has been basically denied usefulness by way of advances in theory since Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. We're over 50% of the way there, and Sargon and Fuentes say that they want more. Why should we give them any? That's what I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And yeah. If you happen to be in a place that celebrates Thanksgiving this week, happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you next time.